in loving memory of Ken and Joyce Anderson, who were Minnesota State Fair goers to the end. Ken and Joyce Anderson made the Minnesota State Fair campground their home for 12 days a year during the 1980s and into the 90s. When not camping here, they spent days at the fair each year, wandering, making friends, eating, and enjoying the shows and spending time with their large and growing family. Their granddaughter, Shannon, and her husband, Lee Sackett, began exhibiting tractors at the Old Iron Show. Ken and Joyce spent several days each year greeting other fairgoers from their booth. Ken loved to sit in front of his John Deere H and swap farming and tractor stories with the many visitors who came by. He had been a Greyhound bus driver and enjoyed meeting a fellow driver in the crowd. Joyce frequently spent time in the booth between her visits to creative activities, the grandstand, and any other exhibit she found interesting. She brought her joyful spirit with her wherever she went, and she was in her element at the fair. Joyce passed away in 2020 at age 94. In 2022, Ken spent his last day at the fair, chatting and eating a Midway men's burger like always. His health had started to falter, but they didn't know just how much. He passed away within days of the visit at age 93. It was a special gift for his family to have that last day at the fair with Ken, while he was doing something he loved. May we all live our lives as fully as Ken and Joyce. Hi everyone, I'm Kelly Sackett at Lee J. Sackett Incorporated. Today is day 3 of our Spotlight Tractor here at the Minnesota State Fair. Today's feature is this 1941 John Deere H. So the first thing we're going to do is turn on the gas, starting with this. It's really far in there, so we made this little thing to make it easier to turn on. So along with turning on the gas with over there, you also have to turn on the gas here. So you put it to F for fuel. And this tractor used to start on gasoline and then switch over to kerosene because kerosene was a lot less expensive and gave it a little bit more power. But instead of starting on kerosene and staying on kerosene, the problem with that is that kerosene, to be able to work, has to be hot. So you have to start it with gas until the engine is warmed up. And then once the engine's warmed up, then they would switch it over to kerosene. But we only have gas today. So last thing we're gonna do before we start it is just make sure it's in neutral, and it is. So this tractor does have an electric start, but today I'm gonna be starting it with the flywheel, which the steering wheel fits into it, and then you can pull it like that. So the settings I normally put it on is like closed all the way and then just open a bit, and then choke it, and then we'll see how it looks. This 1941 John Deere Model H tractor was originally shipped to Minneapolis, Minnesota, and then was sold at a dealership in River Falls, Wisconsin. In the late 1940s, the current owner, Kenneth Anderson, purchased this tractor for the family farm in Prairie Farm, Wisconsin. The tractor was used for cultivating on the farm until around 1980, when Ken's father passed away. For the next 2+ decades, the tractor was stored in a shed at the farm where Ken regularly visited. Every time he visited, he would crank the engine to make sure it didn't get stuck. However, the tractor never started. In April of 2000, Lee Sackett married Ken's granddaughter, Shannon Beckrich. During the spring of 2002, Ken and Lee agreed that it was time to bring life back to the family tractor. One afternoon, Lee drove to the Prairie Farm where he met Ken and 2 of Ken's friends. The 4 of them loaded the tractor and Lee brought it back to his shop in Ellendale, Minnesota. The first order of business was to get the tractor running. Lee rebuilt the carburetor, cleaned out the gas tank, installed new spark plugs, and changed the oil. His wife, Shannon, towed him around the yard with another tractor, and it started for the first time in over 20 years. The tractor ran great and was in good mechanical shape. There were relatively few major items that would need to be addressed. The tractor was moved over the pit in Lee's shop, where it was easy to work on from all sides. The only challenge was stabilizing the tractor while the axles were removed to replace the brakes and seals. Lee bolted a length of C-channel to the tractor's frame to support the front of the tractor on either side of the pit. The rear axles were removed and refitted without incident. The tractor was very difficult to start, so the magneto was sent out to be rebuilt. The brakes were poor and the rear axle seals, radiator core, and muffler were also replaced. The spark plug covers had been removed over the years and were lost. Gaskets, hoses, gauges, and wires were also purchased. The biggest problem with the tractor was that it was completely covered with dirt and grime. After scraping the larger deposits off, the entire tractor was sandblasted to remove all traces of foreign particles. Extreme care was taken to plug and mask all areas where sand could get into the internal parts of the tractor and cause damage. Once the tractor had been sandblasted, the sheet metal parts were reworked to remove all dents and dings. For the hood, Lee made a special jig that would hold it securely and still allow it to swing 150 degrees. This made it much easier to work on the many dents in the hood. The grille also required extensive bodywork. Once everything had been sandblasted and the bodywork had been completed, the bare metal was primed with a metal etching primer. This primer forms a chemical bond with the metal to provide decades of rust protection. If this primer had been available and used in 1941, this restoration job would have been much simpler. After the primer dried, the sheet metal was sanded smooth. Then everything was wiped down with a tack cloth to prep it for paint. John Deere Classic Green paint was used with hardener added to enhance the paint quality. The wheels had been blasted and painted a few years before when Ken had new tires put on the tractor, so Lee didn't work on them. After all the paint was dry, the tractor was assembled. Lee likes to paint all the parts separately and then assemble the tractor. The parts are easier to paint and he gets better coverage on the corners and edges this way. However, special care must be taken during the assembly process to make sure that the parts aren't scratched. When the tractor was completed, Ken made a trip to Lee's place to see the results. He was very pleased and has asked Lee to work on several other projects that he has. In 2004, Ken purchased a set of fenders for the tractor. Lee and his team sandblasted, primed, and painted the fenders to match the tractor.